If you've never looked into sea urchins wearing hats, you should probably get to it. Welcome to the CryptoNaturalist. Hello, listener. Volunteering is a great reminder that many of the most important things in life don't involve money changing hands. I might go as far as to say most of the most important things in life. I mean, when was the last time you paid the water cycle for rain? When was the last time you tipped your local photosynthesizers for their oxygen production? Last I checked, phytoplankton doesn't even have a Patreon. Yes, volunteering is a great way to practice your values in a way that rejects the popular myth that value and price are synonyms. I spent the day volunteering with a local parks department here in Mulberry Bend, Indiana, at a place called Chestnut Woods Park. Cassandra and I were passing through the area, and I happened to run into the park system's volunteer coordinator while I was checking for highway ticks in a Sheetz parking lot. Her name was Sandy, and she was on her way to lead a group of volunteers removing invasive plants. She guessed I was something of a naturalist, based on the ornate arrangement of spiders sleeping on my hat brim. I lost a bet with those spiders king, but that's a story for another time, and she invited me to join the day's work. I had a bit of time on my hands, so I happily agreed. Part of the fun of being a naturalist is sharing your passion with others and putting your knowledge to work in the world. So, I retrieved a pair of work gloves from an aptly named compartment in the dashboard, and we followed Sandy to the park for a day of wholesome service to the local ecosystem. I told Sandy that I specialize in CryptoNature, and she smiled and nodded, so I figured she was interested in me bringing my own particular expertise to the day's activities. Speaking of unusual expertise, how about a little poetry? It's time for today's Hidden Lore segment. Today's hidden lore is a poem by Bennett Berardi. Birdseed. So like a flower, a bird, petal feather to show, a generation at a time, what is life? So like a bird, a flower, flying slow from the bud, folding to land, at rest in a fruit. So like sleep, the winter, both bird and flower lilt to wilt, and color against the cold, as a dream before dark. And at an ending, another spring. The seed in the stomach of a bird, still a flower. You know, one of the things I love about poetry is the way metaphor can remind us of a literal truth that feels half impossible. How much kinship exists between a bird and the fruit that sustains it, between that bird and the flower that brings forth the fruit? How thin are the boundaries that differentiate one organism from another? I arrived at Chestnut Woods Park and, once it was clear to Sandy that I knew how to identify invasive honeysuckle, quickly got assigned a team leader role, taking a group of folks along a trail to remove any invasives we encountered. We pulled some garlic mustard, uprooted an autumn olive, and battled a profound amount of honeysuckle. One volunteer noted the bright red berries on the honeysuckle and asked, "Isn't this just food for birds?" It's fun to encounter a teaching opportunity like that. I explained that those berries aren't very nutritious for local wildlife, and enumerated the ways in which invasive honeysuckle damages the local landscape, shading and crowding out important local species. I showed the volunteers the best practice of hanging uprooted plants on tree branches so that they dry out and don't re-root. It was hard, sweaty work, but I was quick to point out the spots where we had allowed sunlight to reach the forest floor again, providing an opportunity for native plants to grow. Around one bend in the trail, I heard a faint whistling sound just on the edge of my perception. It was the sort of sound that's part vibration in the air and part emotional sensation. I'd compare it to revisiting your old elementary school and experiencing that odd feeling that everything shrank since the last time you were in the building. I turned to my group and asked, "Does anybody hear and/or feel that?" There were some concerned looks, so I added, "Nothing too worrisome. I just want to show you a slightly more unusual invasive plant. Now, do you hear anything?" Mia, a teenager from a local soccer team, raised her hand. "Is it that whistling sound?" she asked. I was delighted. "Yes, indeed," I answered. A retired math teacher named Marcus cocked his head and asked, "Does anybody else feel, bigger?" I chuckled. "Now you're getting it." I brought everyone to the side of the path and instructed them to look at a nearby patch of sunlight next to a split walnut tree. "All right," I said. "Now, only look out of the corner of your eye, and look while imagining yourself as somebody trying to watch a toddler sneaking a cookie from the counter without letting them know that you're watching." I'd say there was a general murmur of concern about these instructions, but once you've done manual labor in the woods with somebody, you tend to forgive a bit more of their eccentricities than usual. They did as I suggested, and I waited to hear the first sound of astonishment. It wasn't long. Mia was first. The others weren't far behind. Another teachable moment had arrived. So I went on to explain. What you half see there is called a knothole bush. It's another pesky invasive, though not from another continent. It's here via a parallel dimension. It roots there and here. That whistling kettle sound is a kind of energy passing through the connection the bush makes between here and that elsewhere place. It's invasive because it repels other inexplicable organisms, undermining the consistency of reality in this spot. Mia raised her hand and asked, "Is it shovel-proof?" I like where your head's at, but yes. It's immune to garden variety shovels. At least it is, unless that shovel is coated in sea owl venom. I pulled a vial from my sock and handed it to Mia. "Just pour that onto the edge of your spade there, and watch your fingers." "Is it dangerous?" she asked. "Very," I said. "That's why I keep it in my sock instead of my pocket, further from my heart that way." She did as instructed and managed to pry the knothole bush out of our reality, with encouragement from us on the sidelines. There was a kind of popping sensation when it came loose, and the reality gap snapped shut. We all experienced a synchronized sneezing fit, and became suspicious of the sky for the next couple of hours, but it was a small price to pay for a job well done. Anyway, the point is, if you haven't tried volunteering in service to your local ecosystems, I heartily recommend it. Park services, wildlife rescues, ecological centers. Seek out the folks doing the work and ask them how you can be of service. All right, well, looks like we have a new field report transmission. Well, this one's a rebroadcast from the CryptoNaturalist Rangers of Romania. Say that 5 times fast.
I found one. I finally found one. After years of searching, the months spent doubting even my own. This is a record of the first conclusive sighting of Megaloceros ossica, commonly referred to as the bone elks. Previously believed to be a folkloric invention based on the preserved remains of other cervids, I can assure you they are fully animated and unique creatures. An hour after I broke camp this morning, I found a blackened trail cutting a swath through the trees, and I was again grateful I'd stayed the extra night to listen to old Andre's stories at the inn. The trail was exactly as he described. Frost-bitten and withered greenery along a narrow path, with fractals of ice extending off both sides, encasing more than one unwary creature. But it wasn't a fire-tongued demon I found at its end. The bone elk stood at least 12 feet high at the shoulder, with antlers wider than it was tall. Fully skeletal, it made a soft clacking noise every time it moved, and occasionally the wind whistled gently as it passed through its ribs. By the pelvis, I guessed it was a female and likely full-grown. She walked unhurriedly and did not eat or seem to notice me as I approached carefully. She paused, turning sidelong, and I had a spectacular view of the ice as it bloomed from the tips of her hooves. It was only as I tried to shift my weight that I realized I had strayed too close, and my boot had frozen to the ground. I cut my laces and scaled the closest tree I could find, torn between watching the ice creep closer and the elk stride off into the trees. There are still so many questions. Do they bear young? Do they start out skeletal or lose their flesh through some process? How are their bones held together? How do they produce such voracious ice? Impossible questions at this point, but I plan to follow the elk's trail and hope to observe much more. The ice is finally retreating from the branches below me, though I may need to wait until tomorrow's sun before following the frostbitten path. We'll update soon.
Well, I believe we are still waiting for that update. The Rangers are requesting anyone with knowledge of Dr. Pond to call it in. Concerning, I know, but I met Dr. Pond once, and let's just say I'm optimistic that her update won't be too far off. Until next time, we're all strange animals. So, act like it. Thanks to Bennett Berardi for this week's Hidden Lore poem. Bennett is an arborist and honorary goblin, moonlighting as a gardener poet in Nevada County, California. He draws inspiration from forests, fields, and fairy realms, as well as the works of Gary Snyder, Mary Oliver, and the vibrant community of contemporary haiku and eco-poets around the world. You can find a trove of photographic baubles, poetic odds and ends, and the word of the day on his Instagram, @poem.sower. Thanks to Angela M. Cowan for writing today's field report. Angela is a writer, editor, and hedge witch living on a small island off the west coast of Canada. She loves strange fiction and fairy tales, and can often be found spending too much time listening to mosses and small stones. Her flash fiction has been published in Idle Ink, and poetry is forthcoming in Clarion Magazine. Follow her Substack newsletter, Inksmithing, for monthly-ish writing exercises, creative inspirations, occasional fiction, and general witchery. When she's not wandering the woods, you can find her at www.angelamcowan.com. And thank you to Amanda Milstein for voicing Dr. Minerva Pond. Learn more about Amanda's work at amandamilstein.com.
To find bonus content and a variety of strange rewards, support our show by visiting patreon.com/CryptoNaturalist. You can also help by rating, reviewing, and telling a friend. The CryptoNaturalist is written and read by Jared K. Anderson. For books and poetry collections by Jared K. Anderson and Leslie J. Anderson, visit CryptoNaturalist.com/books. You'll find information about submitting your poetry or prose for our Hidden Lore segments in the About section of our website at CryptoNaturalist.com. This show is produced and edited by Tracy Barnett. You can find them online anywhere at The Other Tracy or theothertracy.com. Thanks to Adam Hurt for the use of his song Garfield's Blackberry Blossom from his album Insight. For more information on Adam's music, performances, and teaching, visit adamhurt.com. Reminder, transcripts of this and every episode are available at CryptoNaturalist.com. Stay curious, stay wild, stay weird.
Postscript. There's an old saying, if you're good at something, never do it for free. And yet, if you're confused about your real passions and priority, well, those tend to be the things that you would absolutely do for free.